こんにちは。このセッションは緑地と公園がテーマです。WHO ヨーロッパ環境健康センターと WP が2021年5月の世界公園週間において作成したものです。はじめのセッションの講演者であるティム・ガイア氏がナビゲーターを務めます。このセッションについての質問も受け付けますのでお寄せください。それではご覧ください。
Welcome everybody. My name's Tim Geyer. I'm with World Urban Parks and I'm the co-chair of Asia Pacific, and I've been liaising with the World Health Organization to bring collaborations with our organization and bring seminars and webinars, etc. to you. We're all pretty excited about hearing the good work that the World Health Organization is doing in the area of green space and health. And I'm hearing from people that some weren't even aware that you're working in this area. So this is a great opportunity, and maybe we need to do more dissemination of this around the world. We also have a good range of countries. Thank you everybody who are up early in the west side of the US and Canada, or for us here in Australia who are up very late at night. So we range from 7 in the morning till 11 at night, wherever we may be in the world. And with that, I will hand over to, we have the three speakers is Natalie Robel from the WHO headquarters, Pierre Moudou from also from headquarters and the European Centre of Environment and Health, and Matthias Braubach from European Centre of Health, Environment and Health. That's in Bonn, Germany. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Natalie. I'll stop sharing this screen and hand to you to talk.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for the invitation to join the discussions today, and it's a real pleasure. And obviously this event is very relevant for us as colleagues who are part of the discussions, are really those, managing urban green spaces and parks firsthand. And if we look at that from a health perspective, we would really consider, this audience as a key public health practitioners. So the group really offers a great opportunity for a strengthened exchange and collaboration, but also the put into practice. So I think that there is no doubt about the effects of green spaces on health, and it has been increasingly attracting attention in political discussions, but also in research activities. And the results of several research projects are convergent towards the existence of a quantifiable association of the effects of green spaces on health. And indeed, if we do look at the opportunities that exist at the urban scale to protect and promote health, we see that urban green spaces offer great opportunities for positive change and also sustainable development of cities. So in this context, I think what is important to highlight is that social and economic benefits of urban green spaces are very equally important and need to be stressed. So the fact that there is this, increased recognition of the role of green spaces as a public health intervention on one hand, but also the recognition that there is increased role of the health sector, that the role health sector can play. It has also led WHO to scale up and also diversify the type of support that we are working on in addressing green spaces for health. So during the sessions with the presentations from Matthias and Pierre, we will have more opportunities to discuss very concretely the work that is being carried out. But I wanted to maybe just give the opportunity to highlight some of very strategic development and also opportunities, but also entry points that we have been working on in WHO. And I think the first one to mention is that there has been an increased recognition of the role of green spaces in WHO strategic advice to member states. And if we want to mention just a few, not only green spaces are highlighted in WHO's global strategy on health, environment, and climate change, where you would expect that to be covered, but actually green spaces have been increasingly reflected in strategic strategies, such, for example, of the strategy, the global strategy and action plan on aging and health. So in that goal number 11, this aging strategy clearly highlights the importance of green spaces for the elderly population. And if we have a specific focus on the current COVID-19 times, we see that the role that cities play for the healthy and green recovery has been further recognized and highlighted, for example, in WHO's manifesto for a healthy recovery. The second opportunity is that there's also been an increased work towards the integration of health within the SDG agenda and also the Global Sustainable Urban Development Agenda. And many of you may recall Habitat 3 Conference 2016, where the recognitions of health and health-related tools were really highlighted as important parts of the urban development process. And again, the role of green spaces within that was a key component. But also, and this is what we will be, hearing more in the presentations that will follow, there has been an enhanced work about the evidence on the health effects of green spaces and also the impact and effectiveness of interventions. And WHO Bonn office has been leading on that, but also in the provisions of very concrete tools that do help member states to actually change policies in regard. And the last example I wanted to maybe highlight here is that there's an overarching increased importance that has been given to urban settings for global public health. I mean, there is nowadays a renewed commitment by WHO on the importance of urban health and the role of urban and territorial planning processes. So even structurally in WHO, this has been, highlighted with a new function, a new role that I am being taken up a couple of weeks ago. So the role that, urban planning, urban policies is playing has been elevated, and the role of green spaces within that is obviously very critical. And this year's World Health Day is, for example, focusing on health equity. And we have been really discussing the opportunity to highlight all the work that is done, for example, through World Urban Parks Network cities on the work on green spaces as a way to address actually health equity. So maybe just in conclusion, just to say that there are obviously testimonies of a range of increased scientific and policy work in WHO, and it's diversifying. But I do think that there are still some key issues that are outstanding, and they do require some further work and uptake by the community. And I think this group will be very instrumental for that. Is that first of all, as we very often say, the proportion of the work on green spaces and health is being done in the global north. And I think we need to have other regions being more involved. Also, the definition of green spaces is very different. It varies across countries, within countries, across the UN agencies. And I think that there is a need of having more attention to that. But also in analyzing the health impacts of green spaces on health, key issues such as accessibility, for example, of green spaces, the scale of continuity and the quality of green spaces need to be further taken into account. So it was noted that, for example, the presence of trees on public streets may have an important health impact despite often not showing up in green spaces mapping. And so issues about definition, but exact quality and access would be important. So maybe I will just stop here to hand over to Pierre and Matthias for presenting some of the really substantial work that is currently being done in this area. So over to you.
Okay, Matthias, you want to go first or I go first?
As you wish, you can go ahead.
As you please. You want me to go ahead?
Go ahead.
Yes, okay. I don't know if there are questions anyway, just it's interactive session, so maybe questions are later. There's a session on there will be time for question and answer. I will share my screen and okay. Can you see the?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
It's live.
thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a nice group of people that are working, I think, in a very focused and specific areas, and that the one of parks, and this helps a lot because of the reaction, the feedback of what we present and the work that we are doing. And as Natalie was mentioning, green spaces has been increasingly considered in planning and discussions about the design of cities, the urban forms, and also outside the cities, there's a huge debate about green spaces. So what I will do now, and I think this is a great opportunity for all of you. It's the first time probably that me, Natalie, and Matthias are together discussing green spaces in 20 years, in many years. And we have a kind of parallel work and a lot of intersections. So probably we'll repeat things sometimes, but other times there will be, I would say, unique and particular pieces of work that we are developing. And they all converge about the need that as WHO, we need to provide an interface between the scientific development in the public health area and the policies. I have a presentation that has not many slides. I will try to have it also some fun. I have an animation prepared. But the first thing that we have to deal with is the evidence of the effects of green spaces on health. The second point is about, okay, once we have the evidence, how do we transform this evidence basically in policies? And Matthias has a lot to say about that. And I will probably focus more about the methodology of going from effects to impacts. And impacts are useful and usually used for addressing policies and to raise awareness. And then I will show you very quickly some, for the people that are more nerds among you, some software, so some developments in the quantitative field of assessment. Evidence. Evidence is built by WHO, not only by WHO, usually with expert meetings, with the use of systematic reviews and working on reports that are peer-reviewed, building tools that use the evidence, and also working in case studies. Although we have been not particularly engaged in case studies recently because they are very intense and time consuming. It's not easy to go in a place, in a field, and implement a complete case study. So that's an area of work that I'm not covering with this presentation. Systematic reviews are just, I have a slide where you can see that what has happened is that been a booming of publications on green space and health. So something that was covered before in the past century by the people that were working in ecology and people that were working in planning has been adopted by the people that are working in epidemiology, that are toxicologists and biologists working in social behavior and health behaviors. And now the Web of Science 2019 gave 30,000 documents that they were published in a century. And the interesting thing is obviously what I was mentioning before. There is a huge amount of research that is published now, right, in the last 10 years. And this is an issue in the sense that while 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the experts on green spaces that were using health arguments could rely basically on few publications and they knew each other. There were very few people. Now at the moment, we have a multidisciplinary field where you have 1,000 of people working on around the green space and health effects. This means that it's almost impossible to work alone on this, and you need to have a group of experts, networks. You need to check what's going on, and this is a huge effort for our organization. But this is something that is important the moment you are facing the reality. So you are starting defining what is green space, how much green space do you have in our cities, how this green space is characterized. And these are just some percentage, some numbers from cities in Europe. And you see that the range of availability of green space is huge. So we go from a 5% until a 65%, and then there are cities in the Netherlands that they have even 87, 90% of green spaces in some cities, in some areas. This implies that also the relation that you have to build between green spaces and health is a quite difficult relation due to the fact that you are not exposed to the same amount of green spaces. And this is one issue. But the second issue is the fact that most of the studies, although we have now maps that are showing you levels of green spaces all around the world because we use satellite data, for example, but most of the studies that are done on green space and health, they are carried out in the Northern Hemisphere, in the US, in Canada, in Europe, in the European Union. And there are studies done in Australia and in Japan. But it's a limited amount of countries that where you have research, where you have people reporting about the effects of green space on the population. This is just to give you an idea about how the discussions went so far among academics, among researchers. 20 years ago, the models to put together green space and health were very simple. And now we have a much more sophisticated way of thinking about the mechanisms, about the pathways that link green spaces and health. And with Matthias, we have been working and publishing also about, with a lot of experts about these pathways and how we can then put some priorities. And priorities can be for policy, can be for research, and can be for discussions. And this is the result of one of the discussions that Matthias has finalized a few years ago with feedback from different experts. And this is a quite important milestone for us. It was after years of discussions about indicators for green space, for example. And there was the idea of putting together the state of art without doing a systematic review, but just doing a review. So there is something that I can go back later in the discussion about the improved mental health and the reduced mortality and then pregnancy outcomes and the prevalence of diabetes that is related to physical activity. This work has led us also, myself in particular, to be much more systematic in the work of producing risk. Why producing risk? Risk, I'm talking now with a statistician language, are what put together the exposure to the health outcome that you are measuring. So you need to have an idea of what happens is if, for example, you are living in a neighborhood that is full of trees, full of parks, and then what's the difference in your neighborhood that is full of greenness with a neighborhood where there is just asphalt and gray buildings? And then is there a difference for mortality? Yes, we have measured that, and we know that there is a benefit that can be measured, it can be shown to other people to indicate different paths also for planning. And I will go back on that also in the discussion if you want. This is a booklet that we have been involved about green spaces and mental health. I think it's quite interesting. It should be out in May. And there we have a discussions about the characteristics and types of green spaces. So we are not only satisfied with the fact that we discovered that there are differences between people living in neighborhoods with greenness, with the percentage of greenness that we can measure in a way or another, but we want to know how much people are have mental benefits according to the different types of greenness, the different characteristics. If there is a park, if it is private gardens, if it is a sport club with trees and all that kind of things. And this will be out in May, and also it was discussed with some of you in November. Another kind of work that we are developing, and this is a long-term project, is understanding very well the relation between air pollution and green spaces. I don't think we will have a conclusive word on this, but at least I've been following this for many years, and this year I really would like to have a report. And I mean, the implications of the results about understanding what's happening between green spaces and air pollution are huge in terms of planning, in terms of understanding how to design parks. So we are at the level of not only planning, general planning, master plans, but we are at the level of micromanagement, I would say, for parks, for forests, understanding, for example, that if you need to have some kind of trees at the entrance of a park, or instead of having the border with a road should be, you should use some shrubs, you should use some plants of some vegetation of any kind, of some kinds instead of another. And this is a work that I'm pretty sure this year there will be, we will have some results. Another work that I'm presenting here, I'm anticipating, that has been going for a while. It's on projects in Africa about planting trees. And I've been involved in building a database on the projects where there was announced or they were implemented the plantation of trees at the urban level in many cities. And the database is almost completed and is country by country. And we are analyzing the data. It's a considerable amount of data. Also in Africa, we have discovered that there are several countries, if I'm not wrong, 12, that do not have any project about this. And this is due obviously to the fact that there are other problems like wars or civil wars or conflicts that do not allow any planning of this. And the other point can be that we are just checking what is publicly available, and could be that there are countries where projects are just hidden or they're not declared publicly and they're just implemented. This is so one of the activities that I hope also this year to finalize. I have a lot of questions that we can discuss later, and these are the questions that have moved us from, okay, we know that we have all these health effects that are, we're accumulating evidence, putting together green spaces and health, and how can we operationalize, how can we go operational with all this knowledge? And these are the main questions that we have collected together with colleagues and experts. How we define urban green spaces, what is the best indicator to measure green spaces? How can we relate green spaces and health? I was mentioning before the risk, the relative risk as a risk that we use. And then if there are minimum threshold or if there are characteristics that we have to use for exposure, for suggesting improvements in planning. And then, and this is Matthias is probably the best person here to indicate what are the effective urban green spaces interventions that are promoting public health. I think I can jump this and I will go to tools. In a couple of days, I will give a demonstration of GreenUR, that is a GIS tool. But the idea is that I don't know if I'm able now to show something more just to wake you up if you had just lunch, or I don't know if you're sleeping because of the time zone. Let's see an animation if it works. Usually they crash, but I have fun also if they crash because I take the risk. This is a city in European Union I'm just, this was the first idea when I started working on green spaces, air pollution, and all together. So understanding this is a real city. It's a small, small size city. And the idea is that we can literally put trees, the real trees that are existing in the city, and understanding how much these trees are absorbing air pollution, for example, and then move the trees around. This is an agent-based modeling. I'm not going more on this, just to introduce the work that we have done with GreenUR. GreenUR is a GIS plugin for QGIS. QGIS is a free software it's a geographical information system that can be downloaded for free. And we have worked on a plugin. So it's something that you add to QGIS and you can use for educational purposes and raising awareness, and also to do some calculations. But this software is an introduction to the whole issue of environment and health in terms of green spaces and health. It's still under development, and because of COVID, we have postponed the launch several times, and I think will be next year. And this year, again, we are taking the time to go through the development of the prototype. I just show you, this is the welcome screen of the software, and it's a user-friendly software. So the idea is that we will be able to teach to people that are not expert on GIS, not expert on mathematics, in half hour, in 1 hour, the basic to orient themselves in this difficult, I would say, and complex way of thinking in terms of modeling. Probably it takes 1 hour to understand the architecture. It's quite simple anyway, but I think it's what is more important is the fact that this software open your mind about the whole different patterns of the relation between green spaces and health, all the different kind of solutions that you have to take into account when you're modeling an entire city. Before I was just showing you an agent-based model where you have a dynamic kind of interaction between the agent and then the environment. And it's really, I would say that's the optimal ideal case that where you have all kind of data. And I don't know, this will happen in a few years, but for the time being, we have to deal with a system of a city that is highly complex system, but we have to model it in a more static way. I have just collected some literature recently, and that I suggest. I have to update it because there are a couple of papers probably that are interesting to insert, but I will leave you this. And yeah, I'm done, and I leave the floor to Matthias.
Thank you, Per. So I don't know to the moderators if you want to go with some first questions to Pierre, or we should go ahead right away.
I think we'll go ahead, please, Matthias, and then we'll open up to open panel after that.
Okay, will do. Then I'm going to share my screen. I had some connection problems before, so let me know whether it's working. Can you see it? Is the opening slide visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're good.
All right. So I'm going to present a little bit on what Pierre has introduced already, the work that we have done at the WHO European Center for Environment and Health on urban nature, starting with the urban green spaces, but then also looking into blue spaces. So I would like to look at both dimensions on the urban nature and not only at green exclusively. So it will simply be presenting our work on these two areas, and then I'll like to follow up with some personal experiences made that could also pave the way for discussion and share, getting your impressions and your views from different areas on the practice side on park and park management. Before going into details, Pierre has presented a lot on the science and the knowledge we have on urban nature, specifically green spaces and health. For everybody who wants to go beyond that and really look at nature, biodiversity and health implications, this report jointly produced by the Convention on Biological Diversity and WHO is a few years old, but it's an amazing source book for everybody who wants to know more about nature, biodiversity and health connections. So this is suggested and recommended reading for everybody interested in more detail on that subject. Now going into more the work we have done, as Pierre has introduced, green spaces have a lot of different pathways to health. And I'd just like to introduce 4 main categories. That's the environmental benefits that we get from nature and green spaces. It's the direct benefits for us humans, be it less noise, be it being out in the sun and being out in nature, the social benefits that come with it, and the mental benefits that come with it that Pierre also has stressed. So there's a lot of links how nature and green spaces can support health. And the work we have done a few years ago looked into key messages for urban practitioners. And Pierre has already shown a first report that was made some years ago on urban green spaces and health, a review of evidence. And that looked very much into the what do we know? What is the impact of urban green spaces on health? And we followed up with a project afterwards to look into urban green space interventions and review their impacts and their effectiveness. And the idea here was, knowing that green spaces have an impact on health, how do we at local level use these interventions? How do we make it best possible and most effective for urban residents? What should local authorities do to really get the maximum of these benefits? So these two things combined were then giving us a lot of information. And we had been collecting case studies for the report on the how to apply green spaces that looked into many urban green space interventions across Europe. And these were green space interventions of very different nature, small or regional, very expensive ones and low budget ones. It was looking at large urban parks, but also pocket parks. It was often combined with blue spaces, sometimes actually looking into area regeneration and using brownfields as a starting point and making green spaces and new urban territories on those places. Some of the interventions were gardening and edible green spaces where people were doing urban agriculture. We had some institutionalized settings, nursing homes and schools. And what we figured out in many of these interventions is that the successful interventions brought social and infrastructural dimensions together. This is what we dubbed as the dual approach. It's not enough to just build some green spaces. You also have to promote them and make sure that people are aware of them, people are using them. And it's very helpful in the beginning to check with the local residents what they really need, what they really want to use. And that makes for a good intervention that really will be used at the end of the investment. So just to give you an example of the different case studies where we asked for the objectives, what is the main reason for doing this urban green space intervention? And it was interesting to see that it is more creating urban environmental benefits and urban quality of life in general, and promoting active lifestyle, giving people the option to go out into nature, to go out into public open space. That was in most cases the key objective, or at least a strong secondary objective, while equity and then especially health is a little bit more on the side. It is hardly the main reason for cities to invest into green spaces, but it is definitely considered as a co-benefit. But in most cases, it was the quality of the urban environment that was the main target. And often an additional argument was that it does affect health, but hardly urban policymakers said, we are doing this because we want our population to be more healthy. It's more a co-benefit, at least from the interventions that we reviewed. So looking at the evidence and the information on the practice that we got from the different city interventions, we put together an action brief that puts all that content of the big report into a few pages and really deriving the key messages. And this has been quite successful. It was interesting to see that there's a lot of demand by different countries and different local authorities. So we have been publishing that in English and Russian language, and then different entities and agencies have been providing on own cost translations into Finnish, Portuguese, German, French, and Italian. And this was coming from very different actors and very different institutions saying that this is something they would really want, and please let us translate the brochure. So this is really a document that covered the demand in many places. Just to give you an idea of what is in there, it looks, these are some pages, screenshots from the pages of the action brief to show how do you plan urban green spaces, how do you go about that, and what is the evidence from different cities telling you what is a good intervention, how do you make sure that it really fits with the demands, what is something that you need to be aware of when planning. It was looking into a very important thing, how to make sure that the local citizens are involved, because only when you know what they want, you can really build something that they will need. It was looking into how to promote and how to monitor and evaluate urban green space interventions. This was something where we saw that a lot of local authorities are not, of course, not coming from a research background, and they didn't really have much information to show that new green spaces or renewed green spaces, a park that has had a major investment to make it nicer, larger, or more functional for different target groups, whether this was really more used and by which people, to find out why people are going there, and especially to find out why people are not going there. This is something that is definitely one of the missing pieces. Whenever we got information on what people liked about the parks, that was the maximum. In many cases, it was not monitored, but in every situation, in every case study where we did get information on performance and success and using of the green space, it only questioned the people actively using the space. So it's really a little biased in terms of asking people in the park why they go to the park, but nobody really went out to ask people outside the park why they are not in the park. So I think this is something that really showed up as a big lack, trying to understand why people are not using green spaces. There's very little on that. So that was an interesting finding. And what I also would like to stress is that we looked into the potential challenges and conflicts, be it from a financial side, be it from a health side, because green spaces are not always positive and healthy by default. There's also risks attached, which is often ignored or overlooked. Issues of gentrification and other things that need to be considered to make sure that the green space build is as healthy as possible, also by looking at the risks they potentially may pose. So this is a type of information we pulled together. And a year after the green space, we're involved in a Blue Health project. Blue Health is a European consortium under the Horizon 2020 framework. It's just finished a few months ago. And the Blue Health project has designed a set of tools that could also be interesting. And some of them would also link to blue spaces, because often blue and green are interlinked. So some of the tools may also speak to the green space section. So here, WHO has done a decision support tool to support health benefits of blue spaces. The idea is that it's supporting decisions by planners, managers of blue spaces, to make sure that they are as healthy as possible. It is structured in 3 tracks. And as I mentioned before, looking on the one hand to minimize the health risks, and on the other hand to increase the benefits. And that is health benefits, and it's also eco and environmental benefits. And the tool is doing that for 6 different blue spaces, because they are not necessarily the same in terms of risks and benefits. So this was launched no, this should be November 2020. Sorry, it's out there already. And this is the overview that you see for the tool. These are the different aspects covered in the protecting human health by blue spaces. It looks into injury, waterborne diseases, climate impacts and extremes, and vector-borne diseases. And then it looks into benefits, the mental and social side, and the physical activity side. And it's looking into the ecosystem benefits that at the end of the day also provide, of course, benefits for human citizens and societies. So this is a short snapshot, and if you are more interested, you can go to the Blue Health 2020 Decision Support Tool website and see more and how it works. At the end of the speech, I would quickly like to summarize my personal experiences. That might also be a starting point for discussion. It was interesting to see that the urban green spaces and health in the literature, you have a lot of publications looking into the straight link into health, but on the practice side, it seemed to be more a co-benefit in the awareness and the argumentation of city leaders. The main argument is actually we want to improve the quality of our cities, and this will of course have some health benefits, but it's not the key argument. What came out of the discussion on the case studies, that cost and maintenance was an underestimated problem, especially that you get some specific funding to do a park or something very nice on green spaces, but you don't get necessarily the funding for long-term maintenance. And for green spaces, you talk about long-term projects. It does bring long-term maintenance costs that, especially for a large park, are not marginal. And this is something that was often underestimated and only realized later, that there's a difference between investing and maintaining. What I also saw that there's a lot of focus on the benefits. There were often situations where people look very much on the benefits, but ignoring the risks, sometimes not even being aware of risks and having the understanding that if it's nature, it's good by default. And I think sometimes from a WHO perspective, it's extremely important to raise the point that it's not always good by default. It also has risks. And in order to make it healthy, you really need to discuss the risks. In some discussions, I had a feeling that there was an over-assessment that nature-based solutions can almost solve everything. I think there's a lot of things that nature can do on the social, on the health, on the environmental side, but often I had the feeling that maybe it's a little over-assessed, overcharged with how many solutions it should deliver in parallel. Pierre has nicely shown some of the pathways. I touched upon that as well. Often talking with people on the ground, doing these case studies and presenting their examples, intuitively, they know that this is good for people when you do parks, when you give them opportunities to go out, for the old, for the young, for people having a break from work. But it is very difficult for them to argue their case technically. So it's often based on an assumption, on a common knowledge that this is good for people to have a more green city. But in a political debate, they often don't have a strong scientific argument to justify their case. So this is also why we did this action brief, to provide more ammunition to such discussion. What I often felt is that we are not talking about restrictions. There could be a lot of restrictions regarding climate and what can you actually have, what type of nature and green space you can have, the type of location and already built structures. Densely built cities doesn't allow you a lot of opportunities. How do we deal with that? We are often looking into the very nice examples in cities where it's possible, but you don't necessarily do the same thing in the neighbor city easily. And also acknowledging the long time scales that you need to have a park fully ready to offer all its services. It takes a while and a long, strong investment. Part of the discussion was whether we approach this as nature in cities or nature and biodiversity in general. Is it something for people or is it for nature? Is this the same approach or not? Do we want it to be the same? So how do you approach the whole discussion? Are we talking about nature for the sake of people or nature for the sake of nature? As I mentioned before, blue spaces seems to be a new topic that is trailing behind the green spaces, but is very much connected. So I think it's very reasonable to look at them in parallel. And definitely there's a new opportunity to raise the importance of nature and green spaces, blue spaces as well, during the, what did I write here? The COVID-10, okay. The COVID pandemic made people and decision makers value nature in a much stronger way during the public restrictions, and that is definitely an opportunity. I would like to highlight that just a few weeks down the road, we are going to have a webinar where we launch a WHO European report on nature and biodiversity and health, which is not providing new evidence. It is simply looking into a summary report that will inform different stakeholders that may not be experts on nature and biodiversity and health linkages to understand the topic and to be better equipped for the local work. So everybody interested in this, we have provided the registration link to Tim. I hope it has been sent out, but I will also post it in the chat so everybody can send it further on to the interested networks. And with this, thank you very much and looking forward to discussion.
Thank you to all the speakers. Where do I start? Where do we start? There's an awful lot covered there. And yes, Ben's been putting links in the chat. So anybody that wants to pick up those links, please take them from the chat. And of course, we are recording this session. It'll be on our website in coming weeks. So you can go back and review it or share it with people that weren't able to make it today. I'm going to give everybody an opportunity. So please, if you wish to speak, make yourself known either through the chat or in the Q&A. If you've got a question, put it in the Q&A and we'll address it. But if you wish to talk or if you wish to make a comment, make yourself known through the chat and Ben will transfer you across in and we'll get some open discussion going. Some of the things I picked up, certainly, Natalie, you mentioned that there's a lot of work done in North, and I think Pierre said this as well, in the global North, and there's scope for a lot more to be done in global South. Certainly from World Urban Parks, we recognise this as an area in the world where we have a lot of emerging cities and emerging communities, rapidly growing communities that would benefit from some of the knowledge of the more advanced cities. So we'd like to see work done in the in global South, certainly in Africa and South America and so forth. I'd love to hear Pierre, and I know you had Ant give a brief overview of the air pollution talk at our November Congress. I'd love to see another seminar in the future where we go into that in more detail. There's some fascinating work being done on which are the best plants and so forth to take out air pollution. I'm particularly interested to know if it also will help take out odor, which potentially is an air pollutant. We look forward to the release of the booklet in May on the green-blue spaces too. We'll certainly do what we can to promote that out to our audience. So, have we got any questions for our speakers? Quiet audience. I'm just looking at who is in our group at the moment to see if I can prompt anyone. And Neil, Ben, I'm just wondering if you could bring Neil or Gil across into the conversation and get a response to some of the stuff that's been put here. Not to want to put them on the spot, but I'd love to put them on the spot.
Tim, maybe I can also send a question to the audience because, if I may.
Yeah, please.
I made the point that in the European case study collection, we found that there was very little knowledge of the people running the interventions and building green space in the cities on why people are not using the green space. They knew, if they knew something, they knew why people would be using the green space and go to the park, but they couldn't inform why people would not do that. Is there any knowledge out there from different cities, park managers, or people involved in that? Are there any studies that are run that would explore more why people would not be using such green spaces? That would be interesting, because there seems to be not much on that.
Look, that's a really interesting area. Look, as park managers, you're absolutely right. We're very good at explaining why people use our parks and asking people why they use our parks. It's a fascinating thing. The very question we should exactly be asking is, why aren't they there? Or what would it take to get them there more often? Certainly, I know in older adults, we experience in older adults, there is a risk, a fear of fall, trip hazards. There's a fear of antisocial behaviour, etc. There is some research into why older adults don't feel comfortable going into certain areas, but young people, no, I'm not aware of. Gil, I've put you on the spot. Would you like to make a comment and on what's been covered or ask any questions?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. I think that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. I think that COVID has been horrible, but one positive thing out of COVID is that it has clearly shown that we need to live healthier lifestyles. A lot of the people that are dying is people that had preconditions, but also other than the people that were very, very old, is people that are in not very good health. Like in the US, the overwhelming common denominator has been obesity and lack of physical activity. How would you make the case to the decision makers from the point of view of health? I saw your statistics show that even health is not one of the main reasons why they do parks, but we need to do parks and green spaces, but we not only need the hardware, we not only need the infrastructure, we need the programs, the activities, because otherwise people won't use them. And then people say, oh, but I see people walking. Yeah, you see the few that are walking, you don't see the many that are not. So I think that health would be a most powerful concept, physical and mental health. But within physical and mental health, what would you think are the key elements, the 2 or 3 key elements to convince decision makers that post-COVID to invest more and not less in parks around the world?
If I may, very quickly, I think the COVID is really, what is coming out is how much people are using and going back to use parks in cities where they were, the percentage of people now visiting parks in Europe, for example, is really much higher than the 2 years ago, 3 years ago. These are statistics. And they're going there for mental restoration. I mean, there is a really, I would say that there is clear in mind why going to a park. And the benefits are that you have to use with planners, I think are various and are many. You are putting mental health and physical activity, but the cost, of not having a park are huge. Not having a green space close where you live, the costs for the public health are immense. And as politicians, usually they think more about, consensus and money and budget. I think these arguments can be done quite easily. As Mattia was pointing out, it's true that if you have a park, establish a park, you need the budget to have maintenance and to run activities. But I think now we are in a stage where we can have discussions much more detailed about all the benefits in terms of public health. And it is not just public health because you have less people that are getting with dementia, but it's because you are saving literally a huge amount also of money to take care of people that have been living in very unhealthy environments.
Yeah, so because my suggestion is that now that we are seeing more people in the parks, also because the indoor places are closed, it's a wonderful opportunity to be very loud and very clear in the communication of WHO, of the benefits of nature and parks, because people are listening now, people are paying attention. And my other question is regarding the emerging countries. We are going to double the population in cities in the next 40 years. We're going to go from 3 billion to over 3.5 billion to over 7 billion in only 40 years. So we are building cities all over the place, especially cities in Africa, in Latin America, in some countries in Asia. And in many places, they are not living spaces for parks, for small, for medium, for large, connectivity, linear parks. WHO doesn't have too much money, but WHO has something more valuable than money. That is credibility. How to make WHO's voice in partnership with UN Habitat, providing guidelines and mandates to the emerging cities to make sure to leave the places for the parks that are just as important as they are leaving streets or sidewalks or water or sewage or electricity. They need to leave trees and parks and green places all over the world. How do you see the role of WHO? Because your credibility would have a huge impact on decision makers all over the world, especially in emerging countries where it's the population growth and where the cities are being built.
I think Natalie wants
Natalie?
to answer.
Yep.
But you
Natalie,
are,
we can't hear you.
Natalie, you're muted. No. While waiting for Natalie to jump in and answer very quickly, at the WHO we have a project. It's a pilot project called the Urban Health Initiative, where we have Accra and Kathmandu. There are two cities where we are going in the detail of what has happened literally in the last 30 years in terms of land use and consumption of green spaces. And I think we are devoting a large amount of time to see how really in reality this has all the plans, all the projects that have been implemented for the last 30 years have been decreasing the levels of green spaces. And there are cities in Africa that we know, and in Asia where there are no green spaces left, and the consumption of soil is going to a level in which you have 1-2% of people that have access to green space. And Natalie, I don't know if you're connected now. No.
Not yet. You know, while Natalie connects, also when you fly over the cities, you can easily see where the rich people live and the poor people live, because where the rich people live, there are lots of trees and parks and green areas. Where the poor people, there are not. And even in developed countries, like I live in Toronto, the tree canopy in the wealthy areas is twice the tree canopy in the low-income areas. But in the emerging countries, it's dramatically different. When you live in the low-income areas and you live in a 35 square meter home, you don't live there. You sleep there. You live outside. So people in low-income areas need more trees and more parks and more sidewalks and bikeways and so on. So
yes,
it would have been great to hear Natalie's comments.
No, I just want to add something that in many cities, in many places, we need to have different ways also to organize parks. And in Accra, for example, we have a huge discussion about urban agriculture. So it's just not a garden, a park that you organize institutionally, but there is the need of people to produce some vegetables, for example, and to have access to trees that produce fruits. This is something that is quite important. It's not only UN Habitat, but you have to see the FAO, the Food Agriculture Program, that has a lot of interesting projects. We have to think that there is no one single solution, and what is good in Europe or in Toronto is probably not good in Latin America, and for sure it's impossible to recreate in Africa. Natalie.
Sorry, no, Natalie. Okay, sorry, Natalie. We're not sure what the technical problem there is. But Matthias, I see you've got a question from Japan. Do you want to share that one with everyone else?
Yes, I'll share that question. So the question was whether what discussion is there about nature in cities versus nature and biodiversity in general. And what I would like to stress is that if we look at urban nature, and the question is that we use urban nature as a health determinant to support people's health and well-being, then we want nature that is usable also for children, for old people. It needs to be accessible, it needs to be maintained, it needs to be a safe playing space. People want to walk by and look at it, but this is not wildlife, this is not biodiversity, this is not a functional ecosystem, this is nature for the benefit of people. So if we want nature for the sake of nature and also protect ecosystems and biodiversity, then it may not really be, we may not actually want to allow humans to go into that. So like in a zoo, it should be protected, it should be on its own, it should not be influenced by humans, at least to a large extent. So how do we balance that? Do we look at urban nature as a benefit for people, but then it may actually be a burden on nature? Or do we look at urban nature as a benefit for ecosystems and biodiversity? So this is the point I was trying to raise. How do we balance? Do we look at it the same way? Do we distinguish? And how do we, if we distinguish, then we have two different types of nature, and how do we work with it? But I also wanted to come back on the discussion before. I agree that we have a wonderful opening now to raise the portfolio and the relevance of nature in cities. What I would like to point out is that we need to do it on a small scale, because especially the lockdowns have shown that if you live in a city that has a lot of green spaces, but on the other side of town, it doesn't help you. So we need to really make sure that this is a local asset that people can go to very, very quickly, rather than one big park that may be huge, but far away for some people that will, especially in the lockdown period, not get there.
That's a very valid point. One of the things that was found in Melbourne in Australia, which went through a very long and difficult lockdown period, there was, people were allowed to go out for exercise, but only within 5 kilometres of their home. But was found that about 400,000 people didn't have a park within 5 kilometres of their home. And that's a very, well, it's a city that won the most livable city in the world for many years in a row. It was the difference, I guess, in equity, as Gil was saying, in the poorer, more densely populated areas as opposed to the leafy, affluent areas. And now Melbourne is changing its thinking on planning as a result of that. So while the pandemic's wreaked havoc around the world, it certainly created some great opportunities to improve people's quality of life. Look, we're rapidly, well, we have run out of time, but and we've had some great conversations. I think we'll see, and Natalie certainly has put an answer in there in the chat there, Gil, because unfortunately her microphone has gone on her. With that said, if there's no other pressing urgent questions, I think it's time, certainly for this little fellow in Australia, to go to bed. And I bid you all very all the best, and thank you very much for your time as speakers from WHO. And hang on, I've got one more. Thank you for your answer. I think Guiding Hand will coordinate the urban ranges. So any closing comments before we go, Matthias or Pierre? And
well, maybe
thanks, Natalie.
Just in response to the feedback on the answer, I think it is really something that we need to put an eye on how to distinguish that we benefit from urban nature, but at the same time don't overstretch and destroy nature by using it. I think there's a lot of examples of parks that are overused, and then they completely lose their value, and also their value to nature, of course. So I think this is something very important to look at, to see it. What do we actually want from nature? Where do we want to go in? And where do we actually choose not to go in?
Okay, well, Pierre, we will see you on Friday. And for anybody that's still on, I have, at this stage, I've deliberately kept a couple of places in that workshop on GreenUR vacant in case someone suddenly popped up today and said, I really want to be part of that. So if you do, please get in touch with Ben at World Urban Parks and we will get you an invitation. But it's a small, intense workshop. We're capped at a maximum of 15 and it'll go for about an hour in this same time slot on Friday. So thank you very much. And you will see some publicity coming out on that WHO webinar, which is the 20th of May. Okay. All right.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you. Good night.